At one public event, my daughter-in-law smiled and said my new role would be honorary. Weeks later, at another public event, I stepped up to the microphone with a red folder. I didn't give a speech. I read the board resolutions. I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking for accuracy. This is the story of refusing to be pushed aside, not by shoving back, but by simply putting the truth in the way until the people who prefer polish are forced to look at it. Some kinds of being pushed don't feel like shoves. They arrive in tidy fonts and warm lighting, in the way someone says, legacy, with a smile that means retired when you haven't stopped setting your alarm for 5. If you live close to a highway long enough, you develop an ear for the difference between headwinds and head office language. One makes your hands ache on the shovel. The other asks you to applaud while it renames the shovel. I don't have an appetite for applause. I have a neon sign that hums when the ballast warms up, a griddle that needs scraping twice a day, and a drawer of paper that remembers who paid for them. My name is Eileen Holloway. I am 58, a widow, and I run Holloway Coach Stop and Feed on the east side of Moose Jaw, where the Greyhound used to pull in before the routes went strange and the private coaches took over the night runs. We're a square building with a long counter, a pie case that sweats on humid days, and a service bay next door where my neighbor Earl still changes winter tires with the exact patience you need for stubborn lug nuts. Out front, there's the neon sign my husband hung the summer before he got sick. Holloway Coach Stop and Feed. Letters bent by a man in a back room who called me ma'am and burned his fingers for the curve on the S. In winter, the sign gives a pink wash to the snowbank and makes teenagers take photographs like they discovered something. In summer, it's a fly magnet until I clean it with the long pole and a rag. I don't mind turning gray. The sign is ours. I say that not to be sentimental, but to be accurate. My days begin at 4:30 because bread dough doesn't respect optimism. I preheat the oven, fill the sink, and put on coffee that tastes like coffee and not a complicated idea. The lock on the side door sticks when the temperature drops below 20, so I jiggle it and teach it a tone I've used on teenagers who claim they're not hungry. I salt the ramp, throw a scoop by the back tire where the delivery truck likes to slide, and check the float in the till. 20s tucked behind 10s, loonies and toonies stacked by 10s with an elastic to make deposit day honest. The Interact machine takes its time connecting when the wind hits the line on the pole just so. I learned a long time ago not to take it personally when a thing hums at you before it decides to behave. By 5:30, the first coach drivers roll in. Contractors now, not Greyhound, faces I know by coat more than name. I pour their coffees before they reach the counter and drop the crullers into a paper bag so the sugar doesn't slick up the gloves. We sell bus tickets too. Third-party printouts now that the old books are gone. So I keep a fine-tipped pen and a spare roll of paper for the little machine that does not warn you when it's about to run out. Some mornings I move like a person who knows where everything is because I do. Some mornings I move like a person hauling yesterday on her back and the kettle talks me through it. My husband John believed in 3 things: close the till before counting it, sweep after you mop, and don't let anybody tell you your place isn't worth naming. He died 8 years ago, early spring, the time of year when the prairie seems flat enough to roll up and put away and then surprises you with a wind that teaches you humility again. The month he went, I learned how to climb a ladder without anyone holding the bottom and how to read the gas company's small print with a pencil in my hand. When the compressor on the ice machine failed the second time, I sold the little gold chain John had bought me on our 10th anniversary and bought a refurbished unit from a hotel that thought ice should look like diamonds. Our ice is square and cloudy and good enough. I put it into plastic cups for people whose throats have turned to sand on the long stretch from Swift Current. I have one child, my son Ryan. He is 33 and finished an MBA that still smells like whiteboard marker. He came home last year with big plans and good shoes. I let him take over the vendor calls and redesign the menu. He cut words like plate and special because he said they sounded tired, and I added back bacon because breakfast knows more than marketing. He is smart and quick and impatient with anything that doesn't come with a dashboard. His wife, Jenna, is in marketing. I do not say that with a sneer. I am simply reporting her chosen weather. She can make an Instagram story out of the way light falls on a plate of eggs, and she knows which filters flatter a room that is too honest to flatter itself. She talks about the brand and optimizing touch points and avoiding legacy drag, which I have learned means anything that was built before a pitch deck. When she smiles, I see a young woman who has practiced her mouth for rooms that prefer polish to heat. My granddaughter, Maya, is 6. She sits at the corner of the ticket counter with crayons and a stack of scrap paper and draws buses that look like whales with wheels and people with careful eyelashes. She is the only person allowed to ring the little bell by the register for fun. Everyone else only rings it when I'm in the back and the coffee machine misbehaves. The week it happened was clean cold, the kind of cold that makes a person stand straighter because slouching lets the air under your coat. We had been invited to a chamber mixer at the hotel just off the number 1. I go when I can, not because I like handshakes that smell like business cards, but because it's good to know which way the wind is blowing before it hits your frontage. Ryan said I should come because they'd be announcing a new chapter, and Jenna chimed in with, "We've got mock-ups. You'll love it." I brought a tray of butter tarts because showing up empty-handed makes people suspicious of your motives. The ballroom was one of those rooms that tries to forget where it is. Carpet too soft for Saskatchewan boots, dimmers turned down to make everyone's face look agreeable. A bar that sold beer in bottles with labels that spoke more about mountains than barley. On the far wall, poster boards sat on easels, before and after images, some of them my place tilted to catch the flattering light. Our neon sign had been softened to a glow that made it look like it carried a minor key. In the middle, a banner read, "Holloway Hub, a new era in roadside service," and underneath, "Founded by Ryan Holloway." My mouth didn't do anything dramatic. It's an old mouth. It knows better than to give away free material to strangers. I stood near the coffee urn, habit, and took in the details. The font modern as a haircut, the logo that turned our H into a highway that disappeared toward a horizon where no one would need pie. The chamber president did the microphone thing he always does, thanks to sponsors, raffle at the end, buy local, and then handed it to Ryan. My son looked good up there. He always has. He talked about upgrading pumps, about franchising, about aligning with customer expectations. He used the word scale like a person promised a ladder. He gestured at the poster where our greasy spoon became a clean line cafe. He thanked me. My mother built the foundation, and the room clapped the way rooms clap for a woman who keeps early hours. Then the moderator asked, cheerful as a school principal, "And what will Eileen's role be in this next phase?" Jenna leaned into the mic with her best smile and said, "Mum will transition to an honorary role. Operations are for the next generation." Honorary. My husband used to joke that honorary means a chair with your name on it that nobody expects you to sit in because they've already sold the seat. I stood there with butter on my hands from the tarts and the smell of the griddle in my hair and listened to my life being moved 2 inches to the left to make room for a photograph. Someone asked about our history. Jenna said, "We're thrilled to honor it while we move forward," and you could hear the italics like a zipper catching. On the poster behind them, my husband's picture had been taken down and replaced with a mood board, matte black fixtures, white tile, a plant that would not last a week in February. A few minutes later, a reporter from the local paper, girl with sensible shoes, pencil behind her ear, asked me how I felt about the vision. "Curious," I said, and she wrote it down, then added, Eileen smiled as if that were news. I took a cup of coffee too hot to drink and walked to the edge of the room because you're less likely to be pushed if you're already holding the wall. The rest of the evening performed as expected. Cards exchanged, promises made, private jokes that aren't as private as people think. There was a photo for the chamber page, Ryan and Jenna in front of the banner, me off to the side holding the butter tarts like a prop, and a reel on Jenna's account later that night titled, How to Respect the Past But Not Get Stuck There, with our neon sign blurred for aesthetic focus. At home, the video played soundlessly while I washed the tart tray and dried it with the towel that smells like grease remover, no matter how many times I rinse. Back at the stop, the light over the sink buzzed because the ballast has been asking for a replacement for months. I keep a list on the walk-in door. Light, order more ketchup packs, find the box of old ticket stubs, call the vendor about the debit machine glitch. I added a line in my other list, find old corporate registry, mortgage docs, insurance. Then I pulled the milk crate from the bottom shelf in the office, the one labeled papers in my husband's block letters, and set it on the table. The lid sticks. It always has. Inside, our business registration, a copy of the mortgage from the year we took a second one to ride out COVID, the invoice for the compressor, the lease agreement from back when the bus line still printed your schedule on a laminated card, letters from drivers who got caught in the blizzard of 2017 and slept on our floor because the highway shut and there was no better place to be than somewhere with a kettle and a woman old enough to know how to keep the air kind. I laid each piece down in order, company articles with my name and John's, the bank letter acknowledging the line of credit with my signature as guarantor, the annual return I filed with onion-scented hands at the kitchen table, the business license renewal with my check stapled to the corner, the letter from the RM thanking us for opening early on the day they had to clear the interchange before school, the email from the coach company that begins, Eileen, you saved us today. Written by a dispatcher who has no time for flattery and therefore counts more than 10 compliments from any consultant. There are things a person doesn't plan on writing down, and then a night comes when you do it because you can't sleep, and the pen seems like the only tool that won't argue. I wrote in a small notebook, sold wedding ring to pay payroll February 2021. Worked the grill with a fever and mask in January 2022 because Simone had COVID and the breakfast rush does not take fog delays. Paid GST late exactly once with penalty because the truck slid the delivery and I chose eggs over fines. Co-signed Ryan's first car when the bank treated his first job like a favor I owed them. Ryan asking to be added to the vendor portal this fall. Said it would be easier if invoices came to him. I kept that line brief. Pride wants to write an essay. Paper wants just the facts. I'm not a woman who irritates the future with speeches. I flossed, I turned off the sign to give the transformer a rest, and I set John's photograph back up on the shelf in the office where it belongs. He's standing beside the sign on the day he wired it, cheeks chapped from the wind. Grin not for the camera, but for the way light looks when it is finally doing what it's supposed to. I went upstairs to the small apartment that sits above the kitchen and laid out my clothes for morning. Thermal leggings, socks that keep their promises, the heavy apron I use for frying. I slept 2 hours, woke, made tea, slept another 90 minutes, woke again with the word honorary sitting on my chest like a cat I had never owned. Work held me upright the way it always does. The bus company texted to say the 6:05 would be early. I put the muffler on and pulled the doors at 5:30. The road crew came in with snow on their shoulders and went out with egg sandwiches eaten in 3 bites. Earl popped over from the bay to ask if I wanted him to have a look at the ballast. I said yes and added another pie to the case because the road looks longer after you solve something. I wiped the window glass where the breath marks like ghosts this time of year. At noon, I heard the door again and looked up expecting a driver. It was Jenna with a jacket that did not look built for weather and a clipboard that did. "We're meeting an investor here," she said, as if the diner were a neutral room. "Just a quick walkthrough for their deck." She looked at the neon sign, then at the yellowed photographs of athletes and truckers who had given us their faces to fill a wall. "We'll probably do a photo refresh," she added, a sentence with the shape of a throw pillow. "We want to avoid nostalgia." I told her the griddle was hot and the floor by the coffee machine gets slippery if you step in the wrong place. She laughed in a room where I hadn't made a joke. A few minutes later, Ryan came in with a man who smelled like winter and money. They did the tour. They pointed at things and nodded at ideas. The man used the word opportunity like he had trademarked it. They stood by the sign and took a picture with the flash off so it would look like a memory. I stood behind the counter and refilled salt shakers and listened to my own breath and to the low buzz of the light John never did replace because he secretly liked how it sounded at 5 a.m. when he unlocked the door. After they left, the room settled, the way a room does when it remembers itself. I flipped the open sign to closed mid-afternoon for 20 minutes because I needed to count the till undisturbed and write Tuesday on the deposit bag. When I turned it back over, a woman from the chamber slid in with a poster tube and asked if she could hang the New Era announcement on the bulletin board. I pointed to the cork above the sugar packets. She tacked it up with the same care I use on notices for lost gloves, then told me in a small voice she doesn't get to use at parties that her dad drives nights and doesn't like change unless the coffee maker is asked first. I said I understood and made her a coffee on the house because people who carry pins get so little thanks and do more than anyone sees. Truth doesn't need permission to turn into a plan. It just wants you to wash your hands and put your papers in a folder you can find while the soup simmers. That evening, after locking up, I pulled a fresh folder from the box under the desk, read, so my eyes would know which hill to die on, and slid the papers into order. Registry, mortgage, license, vendor accounts, long list of receipts with handwritten notes only I can fully decode. I added a printout of the chamber poster that said, "Founded by Ryan," because screenshots evaporate and Toner insists on being taken seriously. I printed 2 of Jenna's captions, the one with the blurred neon and the one about legacy drag, and the email from the coach dispatch that names me 3 times as the reason 37 passengers got home to people who love them. I'm not a crusader. I prefer lists to torches. But I know how to set a table for a meeting that will require a backbone. Before bed, I wrote down what I would need if the wind shifted further. A copy of our corporate registry showing who the director of record is, me. A registered mail receipt so nobody can pretend they didn't hear the bell. A trademark application for the phrase Holloway Coach Stop Feed and the sign's pattern if the province would accept it. A note to the city about heritage review for the neon. No guarantee of anything, but a pause that keeps hands off until people with clipboards have their say. I wrote education fund for Maya. Portion of profits, conditions, no franchise, no name change without my signature and one other director. I underlined signature because signatures are the only promises paper knows how to remember. I washed the tea mug. I turned off the pie case light because pastry looks sad in the dark. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened for the sound the building makes when it forgives the day. I put my hand on the door frame the way a person does when the house is both shelter and witness. Then I went upstairs, put my phone to charge, and slept as if my body believed I could keep everything standing another day. What I have learned is this: you don't go to war with your children. You sort the inventory, you label the shelves, you speak in numbers and dates and job titles. You let the truth sit there until the people who prefer polish are forced to look at it because it is in the way of their ladder. Tomorrow, I will take the red folder to town. I will sit in the office where the clerk wears a cardigan the color of calm, and I will say, "I'd like to check our registry and file an update on signing authority." I will go to the bank and remove my name from any guarantee I don't want to carry for a person who thinks signage is destiny. I will talk to a lawyer whose carpet is too new for his client's shoes, and I will ask him to write what I could write myself if I had a law library in my pantry. Then I will come back and make soup and change the paper in the ticket printer and fill a jar for Maya labeled books. Because money that sits doesn't grow minds, and if we're going to keep a sign lit through another winter, it should be for more than vanity. And when a man with an investor's smile stands under my neon and suggests it would be better as a backlit logo on a white wall, I will tell him about the night the ice fog came through at 2 a.m., how the sign gave just enough pink to make the door easy to find, how 37 people followed that glow to a floor with blankets and coffee that tasted like something you could trust, and how you can't put that on a poster without lying. If he still wants white tile, we can talk after the dishes are done. Some reckonings don't clap. They sit in the corner like a stack of forms, patient and exact, waiting for you to pick the right pen. If you've spent a life keeping a place open in bad weather, you learn that order is a mercy when feeling isn't. You sweep, you sign, you stamp, you straighten the pile until the pages behave. That's what this part felt like. Not a fight, just a long, quiet movement from a crooked chair to one that wouldn't snag your skirt. The day after the chamber mixer, I took the red folder I'd built in the kitchen and stepped out into a morning that made my breath go white. I opened the stop first. The routine is a rope, and I held it. Coffee, griddle, bacon in the pan, like a hymn that always starts on time. The bus driver with the knitted hat came through at 5:50 and said nothing except, "Bless you," which I took like an amen. At 8 sharp, I flipped the sign to "back in 1 hour," wipe my hands on the towel that smells like vinegar no matter how many washings, and lock the door behind me. The red folder fit under my arm the way my granddaughter fits on my hip. Old muscle memory, new purpose. City offices in Moose Jaw keep the sort of temperature that asks you to unbutton your coat whether you want to or not. Fluorescent lights, a lino floor that pretends to be tile, a row of chairs that have heard more sighs than speeches. I stood at the corporate registry counter and gave my name like a person who has practiced saying it without apology. The clerk, a man young enough to still be surprised when systems work, typed with 2 fingers, frowned at his screen, and then printed 3 pages with the rhythm of a printer that needs a nudge to finish a line. "Director of Record," he said, tapping the line where my name sat, "Eileen Holloway." He said it like a school teacher reading attendance. I asked for 3 certified copies stamped with the round seal that makes paper sit up straighter. He weighed out the fee like he thought it might bite, then watched the embosser press authority into the corner until even a stranger could feel it under a thumb. I paid and slid the documents into the red folder between the mortgage letter and the vendor list. 2 blocks over, the bank wore its usual smell of carpet and lemon cleaner. The branch manager knows me by the way I put my hands on the table. Flat, fingers spread, like a person making a promise she expects to keep. He poured coffee into cups that taste like nothing and pulled my file up on his screen. I set Baxter's draft letter on the table, the one that withdrew my personal guarantee from the operating line of credit, and slid the registry copies beside it so the story had an order even a computer could follow. "We'll need to adjust the line," he said, not unkind. I nodded. "Please send the notice to the other signatory with the same clarity you've given me." He nodded, the slow movement of a man who has seen too many conversations break because someone preferred smooth to true. He printed a confirmation. The printer chewed on a corner. He smoothed it with 2 careful fingers as if apology could fix paper. I signed with a pen that wasn't mine and felt the strange lightness that comes when you take back a weight you should never have been asked to carry alone. Baxter's office sits above a shop that sells crafts glued together with care. He is the kind of lawyer who uses good paper and keeps extra chairs in his waiting room because court runs late more often than it runs on time. He greeted me with the quiet a person learns when other people arrive vibrating. We didn't talk about the word honorary. We talked about bylaws. He took out a template for board resolutions, and we worked through each clause, me reading slow, him explaining slower. Resolution 1 reaffirmed what the registry already knew. I signed in blue ink so later we could tell originals from photocopies without squinting. Resolution 2 created a 2-signature rule for any big decision. Asset sales, loans, rebranding, franchise agreements. Numbers anchored it. Anything over a threshold in dollars we picked not to be awkward and not to be naive. Resolution 3 revoked all informal authorities not recorded in minutes. No more "Mum said I could" for bills with too many zeros. Resolution 4 named an upcoming meeting at the community center, so there would be a date nobody could wriggle past. He slid another paper across, a trademark application worksheet. We wrote Holloway Coach Stop Feed on the line for mark as used in commerce, then added a description of the neon sign styling and the slogan, "Coffee before miles." We checked the boxes for word mark and design mark. "It won't be instant," he said, "but filing starts the clock." He outlined the city's process for recognizing character-defining elements in streetscapes. "Neon is the kind of thing committees have arguments about," he added, "but arguments take time. Time is in your favor." We drafted a letter to the city manager requesting a review. I didn't romanticize it. I just put the date at the top. Then came the part I had written in my notebook at midnight, the trust. We called it the Maya Holloway Education Fund. Not grand, not fragile. A small portion of profits set aside each quarter. Conditions attached in language a banker wouldn't grin at. The sign stays, the name stays. No franchise agreements or sales without 2 signatures, one of them mine. It is a strange relief to see love written down in a clause instead of a card. He printed, I signed, he signed, a witness signed. Paper put on its jacket and joined the rest in the red folder. The loudest quiet, I know. On my way out, the receptionist handed me 3 registered mail envelopes from the drawer where they keep office supplies for clients who look like they're going to need receipts. "Tracking numbers are printed on the top of the stub," she said, and I liked her for leading with the information I actually came for. I wrote Ryan's name on one, the bank's head office on another, and the fuel supplier's corporate address on the third. I put them in my bag and walked to Canada Post, where the line moves like people understand winter. The clerk weighed each envelope and stuck the labels on with focus. "You want signature?" he asked, and I nodded. The small thunk of the hand stamp felt like a polite gavel. I took the stubs and tucked them into the red folder and felt my shoulders set down half an inch of something I hadn't agreed to carry. Back at the stop, the lunch crowd acted like lunch crowds always act. This is the grace of work. It insists you locate yourself by real things. ketchup levels, the squeak on the third stool, the way the vent hood coughs when you ask too much of it. I met a registered letter halfway across the dining room and set it on the shelf by the pies, the way a person puts down a baby to stir the sauce. Around 2, the phone started its dance, a text from Jenna. Please coordinate comms. We can't have mixed messaging during a growth phase. An email from Ryan with a subject line like a meeting invite, rebrand timelines. A voicemail from a man whose tone says, I can save you money, the same way other men might say, I can turn water into wine. I listened to none of it twice. I put the kettle on to refill the urn. The sound of water deciding to boil is the opposite of panic. In the evenings that week, the stop turned into a sort of staging yard for paper. I took photographs of what the city had asked for. The neon sign in its winter habit, the grease shine on the tile that no Instagram filter has the honesty to keep, the pump face with its plastic cracked on the corner from a winter that went a little too long last year. I took close-ups of the business license, where my signature lives, and the old photograph of the bus sleeping out front when we let the driver lay his head on the bench for an hour because the dispatch had misread the calendar. I printed them on the office machine, the kind that refuses to be harassed. Each image got a pencil note. Date. Time. What it's showing. Paper likes being narrated to, not flattered. I asked 3 people for letters of support and got 7. The rescue captain wrote one sentence that counts more than 1,000. Holloway's door has been the warmest corner of too many nights to name. Earl from next door printed his name at the bottom of a page full of practical praise. Eileen keeps fuses, spare belts, coffee, and mercy. A woman whose car gave up on Christmas Day wrote a thank you in blue ink so steady it made me want to hug the pen. The chamber's assistant, who lives with a man who drives nights, slid an envelope across the counter one morning with a quiet look that meant, we all heard. No drama, her letter said, just service. These are the exhibits courts rarely admit and hearts always do. Ryan pushed harder when silence didn't make me bend. He sent an email at 12:07 a.m., a time of day that mistreats sentences, with a deck attached. Holloway Hub, franchise model. The first slide claimed, founded by Ryan Holloway, in a font that tries to keep people from questioning. I printed it and filled in the margin with a pen that makes a thick, decisive line. Registered owner, Eileen Holloway. See attached. I attached the registry certificate and CC'd Baxter because CC lines keep strangers polite. Jenna posted a reel called Saying Yes to the Future and blurred me in the background of my own kitchen while she spoke about honoring origins without being held back by them, the way someone might smile at the ladder while stepping on your fingers. I didn't comment. I filed a screenshot with the date stamp clear enough for any clerk to read. The investor man came by a second time, unannounced, with a camera crew who wore expressions like they had been instructed not to catch flies with their mouths. Just grabbing some B-roll, he said, as if anyone would want footage of a mop bucket if meaning weren't being manufactured a few miles away. I let them film near the sign because I don't believe neon can be captured by people who want to turn it into a rectangle. I did not stop them. I did not join them. When they left, I wiped the fingerprint smears off the pie case with a small rag and the same care I would give a cheek. Some days you avoid being edited by keeping busy. Midweek, the city emailed. Application received. Site inspection scheduled for the following Tuesday. Temporary restriction on alterations recommended pending committee review. It wasn't a chorus. It was a lifeline made of bureaucratic rope. I printed the email and tucked it into a clear sleeve, then taped a copy behind the till where only I would see it. The stop does not need legalese with its coffee. I put the inspection date in my paper diary in the same tidy script I used the year Maya learned to write the letter M without making mountains. The bank sent a letter to Ryan the way banks do, neutral, polite, implacable. Given guarantor changes, revised terms will be discussed at a meeting. Please bring updated projections and governance documentation. It did not invite an argument. It invited a plan. He forwarded it to me with a single line, no greeting. This is punitive. I wrote back, this is arithmetic. We did not exchange emojis. You cannot staple an emoji to anything. I made an appointment at the community center for the board meeting. The woman at the desk knows every sports schedule in town from memory. She also knows who lost a husband this year and who has a mother sitting alone on a couch. No couch should be asked to hold. She gave me the small meeting room with the low ceiling. It keeps voices from jumping, she said, and I thanked her because someone had chosen me over their own time, and that deserves a sentence. I filled out the form. Purpose. Directors meeting. Resolutions and signatures. I copied the date onto 3 invitations and put them in envelopes. I walked one to the post office for registered mail, not because he was far away, but because a stamp that tracks looks better in a file than I told him. I tucked the second into my lawyer's hand. The third I put on the mantle for myself, because some errors begin when you take your own attendance for granted. When the afternoon quieted itself into the kind of silence only highways can manage, I sat with the ledger and added a line. Education fund, Maya, first deposit pending. I put an empty pickle jar by the register with a strip of masking tape, and I wrote books in block letters. Customers read the word the way prairie people read weather, scanning, deciding, acting. By supper, there were toonies and quarters, and a 5 folded into the narrowness of someone trying not to be noticed doing something decent. I told Maya she could be the one to count the jar on Sundays. The day of the meeting arrived with a stubborn wind that forced shoulders up. Ryan came in before lunch to fetch the cash log. He didn't look at the red folder on the counter, just over it, the way a person looks over a fence he doesn't want to acknowledge. We could have handled this differently, he said, like the passive voice had saved anybody money. We are handling it, I said, with paper and chairs. He took the log and left without ordering. I made him a grilled cheese anyway and wrapped it in wax paper so it would not ask for attention. He didn't eat it. I left it on the back counter. Earl took it home at closing because food doesn't learn from other people's pride. At the community center, the small room's carpet held the sound of shoes. Baxter placed the resolutions on a plastic table, and I put my hand on the red folder without thinking. Ryan arrived with Jenna. He had the look of a man who had been asked to present a deck to people who prefer bills. Jenna sat with her coat on. We went through the agenda with the care of people counting medicine. Approve minutes of the last formal meeting. Years ago, grief breaks, not just hearts, but paperwork. Adopt Resolution 1, reaffirm directorship. Vote carried. Resolution 2, 2 signatures above a threshold and for anything that changes the face or name of the business. Vote carried. Resolution 3, revocation of informal authorities. Vote carried. Resolution 4, trust terms acknowledged and recorded. Vote carried. Baxter collected signatures. A witness signed, the folder closed, with the small sound my husband's tackle box used to make when Sunday called us to rest. Is this necessary? Ryan asked as he capped the pen, the way a person asks whether if it intends to be an inconvenience. Yes, I said, because it was. He looked at Jenna, and she looked back at him with a face I had only ever seen in rooms full of people performing conviction. I stood and said what I had been practicing when the soup simmered. This place isn't a story you tell to make other people feel clever, I said. It's a room where drivers put their elbows down when they're too tired to pretend they're fine. It's a pump that will not be used to borrow money for someone else's adventure. It's a sign a man burned his fingers for. You can pitch a future without tearing up the floor you're standing on. He left before I could tell if the sentences found a place to sit inside him. If they did, they would take their time. If they didn't, the bank and the city would help. That is what grown-up systems are for, to keep people honest when they've mistaken ambition for due process. The following day, the city inspector came to look at the sign. He had a clipboard and a face like a farmer's in January. Fair, but not anyone's fool. We stood on the sidewalk while he made notes about wiring and placement and the way a sign holds the street together without trying to. It's a piece, he said, meaning it belonged, even if no one had thought to say so out loud until now. He took his photographs, nodded once, and said a phrase I wrote down phonetically in my mind as if it were a blessing. Recommendation for temporary protection pending committee review. He pronounced the words like nails driven straight. In between these papers and steps, daily life insisted, with kind rudeness, that it be done. A driver came in with a headache the size of the number 1, and I poured water without charging and pointed to the aspirin behind the till. A kid forgot his gloves. I kept them by the register until he came back, cheeks red with the sort of fear that only mislaid things and stern mothers can cause. The friar complained, and I listened and did not ask it to be young. The Interact machine went down, and I wrote names on a pad and trusted. People returned the next day with cash. They always do if you spell their names right and give them a whole napkin without asking them to apologize for needing 2. The investor man called and left a message using a tone I suspect he uses with men he describes as old school, right before he offers to take them out for golf in a season that knows better. We think a slight shift is still possible, he said. We have a brand package that honors origins. He meant he could put the letter H on mugs. I did not return the call. The bank meeting with Ryan went ahead without me. The manager told him what he'd told me. The figures would have to stand without the crutch of my guarantee, and the rebrand projections would need to survive a stress test that included something less generous than hope. Numbers have a way of telling the truth no story can blur. She took the job like she had been hired for it. Late that week, I stood at the counter with the red folder open and the certificate about the sign on top. Maya sat on her stool drawing a bus with eyelashes and small hearts in the windows, for which I apologized to no one. "What are you doing, Nana?" she asked, and I told her, making sure our words match what's real. She nodded like this had always been a thing adults should do and went back to her drawing. Toward the end of the week, Jenna set up a photo shoot for Saturday. Soft launch, she called it, hair sprayed into place, photographer circling like a bird curious about bread crusts. She draped a cloth over a section of the wall where the old photographs of truckers hang. "We'll refresh this," she said to the room, which felt braver than saying it to me. I said, "Don't tape to paint, because photographs don't need to be heroes if you keep them safe from damage." She smiled in the way that takes practice. The photographer asked her to step closer to the glass case. The reflection caught the red folder on the counter and put it in their frame no matter how they adjusted themselves. I didn't mean to enjoy that. I did, but softly. When Saturday came, the stop filled with the sort of half-festive air that happens when people aren't sure whether they're at a party. The Legion ladies brought squares. The chamber president tried to decide whether a ribbon required the mayor. Earl leaned on the door jamb and told anyone who would listen that he'd replaced the ballast and the buzzing had dropped by half. I kept the coffee moving and listened hard. This is something women my age are good at, hearing a room without committing to a corner. Ryan looked misplaced inside his own jacket. Jenna floated like a person who's learned to stand on toes, invisible to the camera. People strained to see whose sentence would stick. When a microphone materializes, you know a moment is being built. The teacher, who always gets the gym quiet, stepped up and welcomed the soft launch, congratulated us on being a community anchor, and then, bless her, invited Eileen, who knows this place's morning breath better than anyone, to say a few words. I put down the carafe, wiped my hands, and walked up with the red folder against my hip like a child that needed the view. I didn't open it. Not yet. I looked at my son, then at the sign, then at the room that has seen more turning seasons than any of us deserves. I thanked people for showing up on days when roads didn't want to, and I said the sentence I had been rehearsing while scrubbing the griddle. We will keep the parts of this place that hold us, and if we add anything new, we'll fasten it with 2 pairs of hands. That was all. No foreshadowing, no flourish. The room let itself breathe out, and I felt, without anyone needing to tell me, that the next time a microphone sat on our counter, a piece of paper would stand beside it, and what it said would be the end of the argument. I went back behind the counter and poured coffee for a man who never remembers cream until the second sip. Outside, the neon hummed like a thing preparing to agree with spring. Inside, I wrote tomorrow's prep list on the whiteboard. Bacon, onions, slice pies, count till, keep the truth in reach. The red folder lay open where the light from the front windows could find the seal on the registry pages. The city's email printed clean, the signatures lined straight. We were not at war. We were aligning hinges. And that is how this part ends, with paper squared to corners, a room almost ready to trust itself, and a woman measuring the distance between the counter and the palette we use for a stage. Not because she loves the sound of her own voice, but because she knows that when the next banner comes out and a sentence tries to climb over an old one, a certificate laid down first makes the climb less tempting. Endings on the prairie don't thunder. They arrive steady and visible, like the way a well-shoveled ramp looks against a drift, or how the neon warms from cold blue to honest pink if you give it 2 full minutes with the switch on. I used to think justice looked like a door slamming. Now I believe it looks like a door closing without sticking, because someone planed it and sanded it and rehung it on the right hinges. That was the mood on the Saturday we put our papers where our mouths had been. Not a fight, not a triumph, just the simple decency of setting things square in front of people who needed to know which way was forward. We called it a grand opening, though the weather had already decided the day would be more functional than festive. Bright without bragging, air sharp as an apple skin, flags making the kind of talk rope makes when it's satisfied. Jenna had built a banner that said, Holloway Hub, a new era, and she'd brought a handful of people who could talk about eras as if time were a product line. Ryan wore his presentation jacket. He looks good in jackets, and that has been true since grade 10. The investor, Aaron, was there too. Polite coat, hands that made neat shapes when he spoke. They arranged themselves in front of the banner with the gift of people who have rehearsed where to stand to make rectangles look like authority. I opened early because coffee doesn't care about marketing. The neon sign hummed, pleased with itself, washing the snowbank in that soft pink that makes night workers believe for a minute they live in a forgiving world. I set out the pie, the squares the Legion ladies had dropped off like an offering, and the jar with books written on the tape, Maya's jar, now full enough to make a wrist feel useful. I wiped the counter even when it didn't need it, checked the float, and stood a moment with my hand on the red folder. Not because I needed courage, but because I like to start with the instruments in tune. People came the way prairie people do, in pairs and small clusters, with elbows tucked against the wind, with jokes that have already done their work. Earl planted himself by the service bay door so he could talk ballast with anyone willing to be educated. The school teacher who always gets the gym quiet started arranging the chairs without being asked. The rescue captain parked the truck where kids could climb in after speeches as payment for all the nights they had been told to stay home. The mayor shook my hand. The chamber president juggled name tags like a man convincing himself he was helping. And a reporter from the paper tested her camera's appetite for cold by taking a shot of the neon at an angle photographers favor when buildings have earned the right to be stubborn. We made a room out of air and chairs and people willing to carry their own coats. When it looked like no one else would pretend to be late, the teacher took the pallet we use as a stage and welcomed us. She thanked everyone who had lifted rather than watched. She nodded at our sign, called it a piece of the street, which was the kindest phrase I'd heard anyone give a thing made of glass and transformer hum. Then she handed the microphone to Ryan. He did not swagger. He gave a speech that would have been good in a room that hadn't met him before, about improvements to safety, about a schedule the bank would like, about finding a way to make a living without selling your weather to anyone who waved a brochure. He said we more than I, and that is a habit I do not plan to punish. When he gestured at the banner, he did it as if he'd remembered his mother could see his hand. The investor man took the microphone next and used vocabulary that keeps conferences fed. Phased, scope, risk, runway. He landed the plane carefully on a sentence about honoring what works. It was not a lie, and for that I was grateful. When the teacher lifted her eyebrows at me, I stepped up with the red folder. I did not open it at once. I touched the cover as if it were a shoulder. I thanked people for coming out on a day that preferred honest tasks. I named the volunteer hours that had kept our stop from vanishing when the Greyhound did, and I said, with the same voice I used to tell a driver his eggs will arrive when the toast does, that we had put a few things in writing to make sure our sign stayed where the map says it lives, and our name stayed where mouths expect to find coffee that tastes like coffee. I lifted the frame that carried the city's seal, temporary protection for the neon while the Heritage Committee did its review, and I turned it so the light found the embossing. Then I read the resolutions into the microphone like a woman reading a recipe. Everyone in the room could cook but needed written down anyway. 2 signatures for major decisions. No name change, without the same. Revocation of stray authorities that had been using my kitchen without washing their hands. I announced the trust in Maya's name, books and school and a note about community, funded by a slice of profit contingent on doing right by what the town already recognizes when it sees it. And then I did open the red folder and set the certified registry copy on the crate we were calling a podium, because paper rids a room of the kind of confusion that costs money. It wasn't dramatic, it was clean. The teacher thanked me, and her voice didn't shake when she did it. The mayor made a short, useful sentence about process. The chamber president tried to clap early and then had the good sense to pretend he was warming his hands. There were questions, but not the kind that seek blood. One man wanted to know whether the city could tell us what to do with our sign forever. No, I said. They can tell us to wait while they decide whether it belongs to the street as much as it belongs to me. They can buy us time to breathe. He nodded, satisfied, because the people here understand time better than they understand applause. After the formal words, we did what we're built to do. We ate. A woman I've seen every winter for 20 years, always in a blue parka 2 sizes too large, put a $5 bill in Maya's jar and told her, for a book not about princesses, and my granddaughter said, about bridges, which is a word I would have written in the air if breath made ink. Earl harangued the investor about ballast in a manner that only sounded like a harangue until you realized he was teaching. The reporter took photographs of hands instead of faces and will be the better for it when she's older. Inside the diner, the coffee moved from pot to cup the way church moves from hymn to benediction when the sermon has done no harm. Consequences traveled behind the event like weather and caught up without drama. The franchise representative, slick coat, name tag larger than his contribution, found me by the pie case with a question his mouth softened to look friendlier than it was. Given governance adjustments, what's the timeline on the brand transition? I said. There isn't one, and turned the city's letter toward him so the words temporary protection could introduce themselves. He shook my hand anyway, a man who knows how to leave without collecting bad words he didn't earn. Later that afternoon, the bank sent an email with a date and time for a meeting Ryan could not cancel. Reevaluate the line of credit in light of the guarantor change. Bring realistic projections. Evidence of two-signature governance. I printed it and clipped it behind the vendor ledger. I did not dance. I took the garbage out to the back bin and knocked the snow off the lid so Earl wouldn't be the one to do it after closing. Because nothing about winning should be heavy for your neighbor. Jenna's push receded the way tidal waters do when they realize there's a shelf beneath them that wasn't put there for their benefit. She posted a soft opening recap with music that sounded like a handshake. The video found me in 3 frames pouring coffee, and whether by intention or accident, she didn't blur my face. Later, she sent a message suggesting content collaboration to tell the story of evolution without erasure. I answered with a picture of the jar marked books and wrote, "We can collaborate on the library's Saturday reading hour." She didn't reply. That's not a tragedy. It's the start of someone learning where they're useful. Ryan took his meeting at the bank. He emerged 2 hours later with a folder slimmer than pride prefers. He came directly to the diner. This is a good sign in a town where men often choose the long way past the places that will tell them truths they can smell. He sat at the counter with his hands around a cup I refilled without asking. "They want a plan," he said, which always means someone has been borrowing the word vision too freely. "They want to see cash flow without mother as bank." He tried to laugh. It didn't stick. "They want 2 signatures. He added, half a question. "So they can trust the first one," I said. He nodded, and I watched his jaw loosen until his face went back to being the same face that begged for an extra pancake at 6. "I can do a plan," he said, and the sentence had the shape of a man offering to learn. "Good," I said. "Start tomorrow. The grill scrapes better if you heat it first." He came early, and if his shoes minded the grease, they didn't speak. He scraped, and I showed him how to hold the razor at the angle that persuades stubbornness rather than punishing it. He wrote a list of deliveries that can't run late in a week when Snow wants to invent excuses. He answered a call from a vendor and after a look from me, refused to let them slide a cost increase under the door just because everyone else was too cold to come outside. He learned where we keep the short straws for kids and the long ones for men who drive and don't want to tilt their heads. He watched the way the room practices kindness without asking permission. And when the lunch rush broke open, he stood by the coffee urn with his back to the wall and his eyes up, exactly as his father used to. We said very little that day about eras. The city inspector returned with the Heritage Committee's chair 2 weeks later. They stood under the sign and spoke like people who knew a bit about neon and a lot about what a town looks like when you take away the things that make it itself. They asked me about repairs and wiring and whether I'd ever thought of changing the typeface. "No," I said, and I let my hands hold the air as if they were remembering the ladder John stood on. That day he burned his fingers and didn't swear, because our son was 11 and heroic about repeating new words. "We will recommend protection," the chair said, plain as flour. It'll go to council for a vote. She looked at Ryan and then at me. It will still be your sign, she added. It will also be ours. I have never liked the word shared when it's used on things people have paid for with private pain. But when she said it, I saw what she meant, that a thing can belong to a street without being stolen from the hands that clean it. The investor wrote a cordial email. Given governance, given timing, given community attachment to legacy marks, his firm would pause to reassess fit. He did not include a suggestion for how we might pivot. He didn't have to. Pivot is for ballerinas on smooth floors. On the prairie, we favor braces, bolts, and new screws sunk into good wood. I printed his email and put it at the back of the red folder, a page with the weight of a man deciding not to knock on a door that wasn't built to flatter him. The chamber posted a correction about founded by and used the phrase family business with established leadership. That small line mattered more to me than if they had written a poem. Our sign was left uncovered. The banner found a second life as a drop cloth in Earl's Bay. I did not gloat. I wrote a check to the museum for the display case they'd asked to use for roadside prairie, neons and names, and I lent them a photo of John beside the sign. Cheeks wind pink, grin work wide. They promised to label it correctly. I believe them because the woman who runs the museum still tapes librarians' notes to her own notebooks. Page 12. Turn back. Page 47. Mind the left margin. And then life, relieved of a pressure it never agreed to carry, did what it does when no one is forcing it into someone else's headline. The stop filled and emptied, according to the road's mood. The Interact machine behaved as if it respected the new fuse Earl had put in. The fryer popped a stubborn bubble and then remembered itself. The neon came on and off and on again at dawn. Drivers learned where to find their names on the stack of tickets without asking. Maya's jar needed an elastic to keep bills from escaping. We took her to the bookshop on Main, and she chose a novel with a girl who built bridges on graph paper when her town wasn't looking. We read the first chapter at the counter after closing. If anyone had walked in and asked whether we were selling narratives, I would have pointed to the griddle and said, "Not after 7. You asked for commentary, a stance. I'll give you one without dressing it in fireworks. They tried to push me aside with nicer words than a shove. I pushed back with things that do not need adjectives, dates, signatures, receipts, a sign that throws light whether you agree with it or not. I do not think of what I did as revenge. Revenge is a hot pan you grab with your bare hands because anger obeys no clock. This was maintenance. This was putting new screws where old ones had loosened and writing names where laziness had assumed they could be erased in the name of modernization. It was refusing to sell the porch swing for lumber just because winter said it wouldn't be used this month. Families, ours, yours, the ones strung like lights along every rural highway, don't survive on slogans. They survive because someone makes coffee before the first bus, because someone else salts the steps without being asked, because somebody keeps the ledger by hand even when computers promise they'll never forget. I won't pretend blood is enough. I've seen too many rooms where choices broke it into historical fact. But I will say this. When blood shows up with a shovel at 5 a.m., you call that family. The rest is branding, and branding doesn't pour when the power blinks. We will go on. I will replace the ballast with Earl when the hum returns. I will nag Ryan about garbage day and let him nag me about digital invoices. He will make a plan the bank can respect, and I'll insist respect shows up in how we wash cups, not just in how we address managers. Jenna may find a city where banners matter more than beans. If she does, I wish her the kind of success that allows room for kindness. If she stays, I'll give her the Sunday social calendar to run and let her practice her brilliance on posters for blood drives. And when the council vote comes, I'll show up in my good sweater and speak exactly as long as the paper in my hand asks me to, no longer. If the sign is protected, I will not pretend it is a religion. I will send the chair a pie recipe that holds together in February. There's a closing image to this kind of story, if you like images. It's not the banner folded or the certificate in a frame. It's a simple room at the end of a heavy day, lights off but for the glow of the pie case and the soft square of the neon drifting through the window. It's my hand on the bell rope, out of habit, not for luck. It's the jar labeled books, the money counted by a 6-year-old whose math is made of delight, not fear. It's the red folder on the shelf, fat with the sort of truth that does not need to be read to hold. It's me, flipping the sign to closed, then propping the door for a breath of winter air because a place stays itself better when you let the outdoors come through once, even on the coldest nights. And it's the knowledge I will be back before first light, not because the story requires a sequel, but because coffee requires a hand. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you. If any part of this sounded like your kitchen, your shop, your sign, your ledger, I hope it steadied you. And if someone is trying to push you aside with nice words and a new logo, here's all I learned this winter. Put paper on the lectern before you put your voice there. Then speak low, then go back to work. If this story resonated, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment in English below. Have you ever had to set the record straight in your own family or workplace? What paper first then voice moment have you lived? Share this with someone who might need a quiet reminder that maintenance, done right, is a kind of victory. And come back for the next story when you're ready. The coffee will be on.